When is the Yortzeit today?
No, Yortzeit is in this coming week, Friday.
I remember very well meeting your father at your home. And I think your father told me he learned in Munkach.
Yes.
Together with my father. They were there at the same time, I think. And I remember very well. And once again, I was impressed by those Balabatim that were so steeped in Torah, like my late father and your late father. And I think your father was a survivor, right?
Oh, of course, very much so.
Yeah.
Even my grandfather survived Auschwitz, which is at his age was almost statistically impossible. So we were a family of survivors.
So that generation was a generation of giants. We cannot even understand, after going through what they went through, where they found the koyach to rebuild a new life and to raise healthy families and healthy children. So the Torah we learned today, Shi'eli Ilui Nishmosoi of Rabbi Shaya Aryeh ben Rabbi Avram. And I think everything that Shlomo does to build Torah, to disseminate Torah, Narbotz's Torah, is really a true spus for his parents. And Rabbi Shaya Aryeh ben Shlomo Yanuach V'Sholom HaMishkova, he should be a Meretz Yosher for his wonderful family. And the Torah we learned today is dedicated to Ilui Nishmosoi. So today we are Oisig b'Meleches Koreya. And Koreches Koreya is one of the only two melachos that we find clearly in the Mishnah. HaKoreya al menas litfoyer, HaMoichek al menas lichtoiv. What is the common denominator? What is the tzad shava between these two melachos? Essentially, they are emekalko. Let us use a different term, not only mekalko. HaKoreya and HaMoichek undo. They undo something that was done. The Moichik erases ksiva. The Korea tears apart a beged that was nitpar. And the Mishnah says only 2 out of the 39 of Lamitas Malachas. In order to be chayev, it must be al-menas. Could we have the Mishnah on our screen? Ayin Gimel Amid Aleph, the fundamental Mishnah of Malachas Arboim Chosa Achas. I would like to see the Mishnah because I also want to point out a Tosfos on this part. Are these two Malachas unique? No. Maybe there are 5, not only 2. And then the question would be, so why in the Mishnah we only find 2? So I would very much appreciate if we could have the Mishnah on our screen. This is a Mishnah we probably learned 1,000 times. However, oisi ois machkim ois, and it is always beneficial. I think what we're seeing on the screen is Ayin Gimel Amud Beis, and we need to go to Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph. So turning back 1 page, that is the fundamental Mishnah, which is the source of all the Lamed tests. Could we turn back 1 page and have Ayin Gimel Amud?
It's coming. It takes a second to turn it back. It's coming. There we
go. Okay, scroll down to the bottom of the page. So we fly through the Mishnah and we realize a Teufel steht für uns. A Korea almenas litpoyo, a moichek almenas lichtoiv. It is only these 2 in which the Mishnah says it must be almenas. However, Tosfos on the spot brings the Gemara Shabbos Lamed Aleph Amud Beis. The same is also by soiso. Eina soiso chayev elo almenas livnois. There's a machlokes in the Gemara. Does it need to be almenas livnois b'm koimoi or even shalo b'm koimoi? But it's a Gemara mefureshes soiso must be almenas livnois. Tosfos, on the spot, the Tosfos we are just looking at is mesupik regarding matio. Is matio chayiv only when it's almenas likshoyer or not? Let's have a look at Tosfos. Tzorach iyun. Im chayiv b'matio shelo almenas likshoyer eloi. Umidaloi ton eloi ki de ton moichek almenas lichter vein ledaktek. Dochanam eloi keton asoyser almenas livnois. And it's a beferish gemara that soyser needs to be almenas livnois. So Tosfos brings two different opinions. Rabbeinu Chanan al Perish v'chein mashma b'Yerushalmi kishenifsik chut b'shnei mekoymes v'nikshar matirim beizek shora mashlichem be'emtza. So according to Rabbeinu Chanan, it must be almenas litfoyom. So Tosfos is mesupik regarding matio, because l'chayra matio is undoing a kesher. Moichik is undoing eksiva. Soiser is undoing a benyan. So the Mishnah only states two. The Gemara, number 3, Soiser Amas Livnois. Tosfos is mesupik regarding matio, and Tosfos Daf Lamed Aleph Amid Beis is mesupik regarding mechaber. Maybe mechaber must be almenat lahavio. So 2 turns into 5. In the Mishnah, all we find is Korea and Moichik. The Gemara deals the same with Soiser. Tosfos is a supik regarding matio. That is Tosfos in our sugya. Ein Gimel Amid Aleph Lamed Aleph Amid Beis. Maybe the same refers to mechaber. One of the greatest Svarim on Lametas Malachas is Mogen Ahois from the Mordechai Benet. I'm an Einikel of the Mordechai Benet. My late mother was an Einikel of the Mordechai Benet. He was one of the greatest Gedolim in a Dor Deya, in the age of Rabbi Kiva Eger and the Chassid Sofer. And he has a small Sefer Mogen Ahois on Lametas Malachas. You know, to my dismay, in the yeshiva world today, it's not that well known because, you know, Darkei Talmud have changed. The Mordechai Benet argues that these two that we find in the Mishnah, Korei Almenas Litva, Moichik Almenas Lichtoiv, are unique, and they are only chayev when it is Almenas Litvoya and Almenas Lichtoiv. However, this interpretation doesn't fit in well with the Rambam and with the later poskim. Because the Rambam, Perik Yud of Hilchos Shabbos, and I think we should have the Rambam. We should see the Rambam, Perik Yud, Halacha Yud, and Halacha Yud Aleph. So the Rambam, Hilchos Shabbos, Perik Yud, Halacha Yud, and Halacha Yud Aleph. The Rambam clearly says that sometimes the Korei is chayiv, even though it is not almenas litfoyo. So there are 2 ways to understand Korei almenas litfoyo, moichek almenas lichtoiv, sois almenas livnois. One interpretation would be these malachas are actually mekalkel. Tearing down a building is mekalkel. Erasing Iksav is mekalkel. Tearing a beged is mekalkel. And therefore, it must be mekalkel almenas letakein. According to this interpretation, one would say, if it's not a mekalkel, then it doesn't need to be almenas letakein. It actually is a metakein into itself. The other interpretation would be the interpretation of Rav Mordechai Benet and Mogen Novis, and he argues, Dumya the Mishkan. Korea and the Mishkan was Korea almenas litfoyo. Soiser and the Mishkan was Soiser almenas livnois. They took apart the Mishkan with intention to rebuild it, re-erect it at a different place. Moichik was moichik al menas lichtoiv, and it needs to be dumia the Mishkan. It's not because Mikalko. Almanas litvor, almanas livnois, almanas lichtoiv is not just to turn a Mikalko into a metakin. It is the essence of the malacha. And there is no chiyuv unless it is similar to the Mishkan. But the Rambam clearly has a different opinion. And the Rambam clearly says, Korea, if the Korea is a metakin, in its nature, does not need to be almanas litfor. So could we have the Rambam, Perik Yud, Halacha Yud, and Halacha Yud Aleph? Reb Shlomo, did we look?
It's there. It's right there. It's right there.
I don't see it on my screen. Do you see it?
We're going to do it again. I saw it. It was there. We'll put it up again.
I have no problem taking out a Rambam and just looking into a Rambam if it's okay.
We're gonna put it on. There it is. There. Does the Rav see it?
No.
Hebrew Books is not coming up on your screen?
I see Hebrew Books. Oh,
it's
hey,
right
yeah,
there. It's
yeah.
right there on the top.
Yeah, now I see it. Okay. Yeah. HaKorea kedei litvo shtei tfiros. Almanas litvo shtei tfiros chayev. Aval HaKorea lahafsida poto b'mnei shu mekalkel. So the Rambam clearly says, what is the problem of a Korea shelo almanas litvo mekalkel? And the Rambam goes on. HaKorea b'chamosoi or ameis shu chayev lekloyol of chayev mepnei shu miyashav iznato b'dovazeh v'yanu achitzoi v'hoyel b'chamosoi shechachas b'dovazeh. So the Rambam clearly says, if he is a metaken, there is no need. It should be almenas litfoyo, and that is against the Mordechai Benet. The reason Korea needs to be almenas litfoyo because otherwise it is a mekalko, and the same would refer to moichek or saisa or matir or Mechaber. Haposech beisatzaver b'Shabbos chayev. In a previous year, when we spoke about Makkah b'Patish, we spoke about a Pesach beisatzaver. The Rambam brings this halacha together with Korea. Many Achronim maintain this proves that according to the Rambam, Pesach beisatzaver chayev mishum Korea. However, in the Rishonim Meforshei Shas, all the Rishonim, twice in Shas, Makas Dav Gimel Shabbos Memches, maintain Pesach beisatzaver chayev mishum Makkah b'Patish. I'm getting up for a second. I want to take a Rambam out of my Svarim Shank, and if we could have the Maggid Mishnah on the screen, I'm not sure we could. So most meforshim, most commentators say, well, the Rambam brings Pesach beisatzaver together with Korea. So obviously, according to the Rambam, chayev mishum Korea. However, the Maggid Mishnah, Pesach beisatzaver chayev, memre keleshona, perik b'metamenu, perish Rashi, chayev chatas, the kumash v'leimona. If the Maggid Mishnah quotes Rashi, and he doesn't write that it is shelo kedivrei HaRambam, I think that our Maggid Mishnah saw no reason to interpret the Rambam that is chayev mishum Korea. Many times in my shiurim and also in my tshuvas, I quoted the Radbaz. Tshuvas Radbaz in two different sources says, I rely more on the Maggid Mishnah as a mefarish of the Rambam than on all the other Rishonim. So we have the Maggid Mishnah on the screen. Pesach beisatzaver, he brings the source Shabbos Memches and Perish Rashi. Mash v'leimona. So I think the Maggid Mishnah did not see it as necessary to say that Rambam has a dissenting opinion. And this is one of the sources I usually quote to prove that when the Rambam is Masada, his halachas and Mishnah Torah, the Seder is extremely important. But what was the Rambam's approach? What was the Rambam's key? He didn't share with us his methodology. And I think the Rambam brings halachas because of the similarity mitzad mitzios and not the similarity mitzad lumdus. HaPesach Beisatzav is similar to a Korea mitzad ha'maisa. But maybe the chiyuv is mitzad makkah bepatish. That is not the standard understanding. But after all, it's the Maggid Mishnah. And I think seems to be clear in the Maggid Mishnah, he does not see this as a machlokes Rashi and Rambam. Maybe I'm not right, because, I have a dilemma here. Rabbi Avram ben Arambam says that according to his father's opinion, so who is more reliable in explaining the Rambam? When I quote the Radbaz says, I rely on the Maggid Mishnah more than all the others. Why is that? Was the Maggid Mishnah greater than the Ramban? No. Was he greater than the Rashba? Probably not. But I say the Maggid Mishnah was a ben bias by the Rambam. The Ramban and the Rashba usually came to visit. When you live with someone, you know him better than when you see him in an occasional visit. The Rashba had his own bias. With a touch of humor. Toras Abayis, one of the greatest form of the Rambam is Toras Abayis. The Rashba built his own home. The Maggid Mishnah lived with the Rambam. But anyway, maybe I'm not right in my interpretation of the Maggid Mishnah. Maybe the Maggid Mishnah does mean to say there is a machlokes Rashi and Rambam. Maybe. But I would expect him to be more explicit than that is his kavanah. But anyway, so Rambam, it is clear, Korea, Shumetaken doesn't need to be almenas litfoyam. And it is also clear in Halacha Yud Aleph, because on the screen right now we only have Halacha Yud. But I'm reading to you Halacha Yud Aleph. Hamedabek niyoras o oiris b'kodesh lo soifer m'kiriksim. As I told the soifer b'chayev. Hamefarek niyoris devukim, oiris devukim, v'lo nischaven lekalkel belvad, and as I told us Korea b'chayev. The Rambam stipulation is lo nischaven lekalkel, but it doesn't need to be almenas litfoyer. So it is clear in the Rambam. Any Korea that is a metaken, even though if it's not almenas litfoyer, chayev. So now the big question would be, Rashi and Tosfos and all the other Rishonim, when they maintain Pesach Beisatzaver, I'm surprised. I didn't know that we'll have the Moganovas on our screen.
Korea on the lower left.
Just a moment.
Line 4. Rambam Mashma.
Yes, so he quotes the Rambam, and he says, according to the Rambam, as long as he is a metaken, he is chayiv, even though it is not almenas litfoyer. And then he writes, Aval stome hasugya mashma de bein almenas she'it v'roi soy beged. V'ochem muchach le'el, she'it v'rena b'koimoy. V'chen kosher b'moichik. Could we scroll down a line or two? V'chen kosher b'moichik. Lama le'almenas she'yichtoi, v'u shayach b'moichik oy shenichte b'toas v'im kenena mekalkel, o lefa'om im sagya b'zeh. Okay, It's been ages since I saw this Moganovas. Could we scroll down a bit more and see to the end of this piece, Alan? Okay, here it is. Enough. אבל מדברי רש"י כאן משמע דעתם שמדברים דומי דמשכן ולא יהיה מלוכה רק על מנס וכן משמע בתויסס וסוגיון. So the Moganovas argues Machlokes Rishonim, and he wants to prove from Rashi and Toysos it needs to be al menas litfoil, al menas lichtoiv, it needs to be dumya the mishkan. However, the Rambam bases his halacha on the Gemara Mefaresh Shabbos of Kufay, Korea al Meisoi Chayiv. So why would a Pesach Pesach Beisetzavar not be Korea? According to all the other Rishonim, according to the Moganovas, Rashi and Toysos L'shitosam, because the Moganovas wants to prove from Rashi and Toysos, it must be Almenas Litfor, Dumya the Mishkan. Pesach Beisetzavar is not Almenas Litfor. And that is why the interpretation of Rashi and Toysos is must be Makeh B'Patish and not Korea. However, the Bialocha has a different approach in Shin Yud Daled. And this is an amazing, no, not Shin Yud Daled, Shin Mem, Sif Yud Daled. And the Bialocha has a gewaldige Chiddush. And many have difficulty understanding the Bialocha. Shin Mem, Sif Yud Daled.
It's a very big piece.
Yeah, I don't think we need to learn it with him. I'll explain what he says. So the Bialocha says, Korea is essentially, by its very nature, a mechanical. Korea al menas letaken is chayiv. But when the kriya is be'etzem atikun, that is not maleches Korea. So there's a difference. Korea ala meis actually is destroying a beged. Korea b'chamosoi is destroying a beged. It is defined as a tikkun because he is mishachech his yetzer. He's mekayem a mitzvah. But the etzem kriya is a kilkul. That is the chiyuv of Korea. But when the kriya is be'etzem a tikkun, by its very nature, that cannot be defined at all as Maleches Korea. And the Bialocha seems strange. It seems to be Ipcha Mistaver. If a Korea is Chayev, because there's a Tikkun Min Asad. If it is Be'etzem a Tikkun, would that be worse? Does that make sense? So the Bialocha says, Pesach Beisetzavar, you just need to detach that string that ties the two sides of the beged together. And that is be'etzem a tikkun. Korea is only Korea because Korea, by its very nature, is a kilkul. You're tearing a beged apart. It is a tikkun because it's almanas litfaya. It is a tikkun because it makes you feel better, takes your anger away. It is a tikkun because you're Makayim and mitzvah. But the nature of the etzem kriya is a kilkul. But b'pisech v'yitzatzer it's a tikkun. Do we find a precedent that because a malach is a tikkun, that is the reason he should not be chayiv? Seems to be a strange svara. But I want to go back 1 week. I think last week when we spoke about opening bottles, opening cans. So we discussed two different approaches in a can that is hermetically sealed, hermetically closed. According to the Chazon Ish, it's not a kli. So when you open it, that would be defined as boina. Reb Shlomo Zalman, some others, the Kaf HaChaim say, well, it is a kli. So when you open it, it would be soiso. The person is doing the same thing. He is opening a can. According to some, that is soiso. According to others, it's baina. So we see persons does the very same act, but the gather of the malacha, which malacha is he performing, depends on the interpretation, on the nature of things. If it's a kli, that would be saisa. If it's not a kli, it would be baina. So sometimes the act of stira could be defined as binyan. He is tearing open a can. In nature, that is an act of stira. It was whole, and he's breaking it up. But according to the Chazon Ish, it would be defined as a baina, not as a saisa. It is somewhat similar to the svar of the Bialacha. Somewhat. Still not the same. But it makes it easier to understand the Bialacha. So the Bialacha says, Korea by its very nature is a mekalkal, and therefore we need to turn a mekalkal into a tikkun. And that could be in various different ways. If it's almanas litfon, Korea b'chamosoy, Korea al-meisoy, but Pesach Beisetzavar, the nature of it is a tikkun, that is not Korea at all. But it still seems to be a big chiddush. If not for the Bialocha, I would suggest maybe a different approach. Why is Pesach Beisetzavar Maka B'Patish and not Korea? In Minchas Osha Masechet Shabbos, in a few different sources, I wrote a Yesod. Sometimes a person does an act, and this act could be interpreted in different ways. Could be baina, could be saisa, could be makabeh patish. So if that act has two different results, chayiv shtayim, and that is the Gemara Shabbos Ayin Gemara on the base. Hayam understood the pisla ledikla va'ater tamra chayiv shtayim mishum toilesh koitzer and mefaret. Azoy mevetzorach leitzim chayiv shtayim mishum zereya or mishum koitzer. Because the act he performed has two different results. But if it's only one result, and you could interpret that result in two different ways, it was up to Chazal to define and to decide. Dumya tfei. Dumya tfei. Pesach Beisetzavar could be Korea, could be Makabeh Patish, but it can't be both. On one hand, he is a Korea. On the other hand, it's a Gemara Malacha, it's Makabeh Patish. It's only one result, not two. It's not like a person cutting a bush, and he cuts it in a professional way. It should grow back beautiful. And he also wants the twigs or the petals that he's cutting off. Two different results. Mashbiach as a eitz, koitzer pri. When you throw a rock up in a tree and tamorim, dates, come falling down and they break open upon contact with the rocks, with the earth, you achieve two results. You cut the figs, not the figs, the dates off the tree, that is koitzer. You broke them open, that's mefarik. If your act has two results, chayiv shtayim. But you can never be chayiv shtei malachas on one result. And it was up to Chazal to decide, dumya tfei, and that is the machlokes Rambam and other Rishonim. Is it more reasonable to be mechayev Pesach Beisetzavar mishum makabeh patish or mishum korea? According to the Rambam, at least according to his great son Rav Avram ben Rambam, the direct ma'aser is korea, chayev mishum korea. Other Rishonim maintain no. The essence of this act, of this deed, is makabeh patish. Chazon Ish is amazing. I don't know whether we can have Chazon Ish on our screen, but in Siman Samach Aleph, Weiss Beis, the Chazon Ish combines the two. And the Chazon Ish says, Pesach Beisetzavar is chayav mishum makabeh patish, because It is similar to the Mishnah Berurah because essentially it's not a mekalkel, but only because he is chayiv mishum maka bepatish. If he wouldn't be chayiv mishum maka bepatish, he would be chayiv mishum koreya. I want to take out a Chazon Ish and read it to you.
In the meantime, we're going to get the Chazon Ish up on the screen. Correct, Rav Pesach?
Trying.
I understand. I was speaking to the Rav, not you.
So the Chazon Ish deals, Samach Aleph Beis, with the famous question of tearing open a letter, an envelope, to read a letter. Would that be a chiyuv of Korea or not? Mishnah Berurah, Shin Mem Yud Gimel, brings the different opinions. And the Mishnah Berurah differentiates between tearing open an envelope and taking out the letter. That would be a mekalkel, because you're destroying the envelope. Opening up a letter, which the letter in itself is the envelope. Once those letters were very common, I think no longer. I remember when I was a youngster, there was a letter. You wrote on the letter and you folded the letter, and then there was tape. And the Mishnah Berurah says that is a metaken, because you need to tear it open to read the letter. So the Chazon Ish deals with the question, would that be Korea? Ledas Rashi kefi shebiur Mishnah Berurah. Kol shakriya binyan lo yahava bechlal Korea hanimne melamet asovois. Kriyas Tikun is not Malachas Korea. Yesh lo medochena melav Koreahu. Because you need to open the letter to read it. That is Kriyas Binyan, Kriyas Tikun. Umiu, yesh kan shvusa Tikun Mona, ve'ulai yesh kan Korea gam lerashi, kiven she'en kan maka bepata she'en kan binyan kli. So the Chazon Ish on one hand quotes the Mishnah Berurah, but he stipulates it is only because he is a maka bepatish, which proves the point I made before, which I quoted from the Mishnah, from the Mincha Sasha. Sometimes a certain act, yes, it would be reasonable to be miyaches this act both to Korea and to maka bepatish, but it can't be both. And therefore we need to decide to which of the two is it dumya tfei, which of the two is it more daim. And that is why the Chazon Ish agrees with the Mishnah Berurah, but in a limited way. The Mishnah Berurah wants to argue, when the Kriya is essentially a tikkun, can it be defined as Korea? Chazon Ish agrees, but the Chazon Ish writes that is only because it is defined as maka bepatish. In a case in which it would not be gemmarically, then it would be Korea, even though it is a kriyas tikkun. This is an akuda amuka. I hope I'm making myself clear, because it really is a small amuka. It's a profound dakustik, it's a nuance. So let's move forward. Tam tzis advorim. When the Korea is a metaken, it does not need to be almanas litvor shtei oisios. Okay, we have the Chazon Ish. So the Chazon Ish is Samach Aleph. Scroll down. Here on the page, on the previous Samach Aleph, bottom column number 1. Scroll down. Here it is. Ois Beis. Here it is. Mishnah Borashim Mem Yud Gimel. Hevi b'shem achronim shedonu amuta leftoich igeres chasuma. Closed letter. Could you tear it open? Beis Afan. Begeres atzma devuka hasfos ois. The sfas ageres. Beis munachad b'matafa. So, sometimes you get a chassan invitation. Today, most people don't send invitations. Paperless. Everything is only, internet-based. But I still get a lot of invitations. So sometimes you get an envelope, you open the envelope and you take out the invitation. Sometimes you just open it and the envelope itself is the invitation. And most of the letters, going back 30, 40, 50 years in Israel, the letter wasn't put into an envelope. You just tore open the letter and the envelope was the letter. So the Mishnah Berurah differentiates between the two. If you tear open an envelope and that envelope goes to the garbage and you take the letter out, that's a makalka. But if it is the letter you need to tear open, that is a metaken. And in that case, he would be chayiv midin koreya. Now, so, avoladas Rashi, 7 lines into this paragraph. Avoladas Rashi kepisha bi'ara Mishnah Berurah sham. The kol shakriya binyan. And he means the Rashi of Pesach Meisat Sava. That's why it's not Korea, because it's a tikkun. Yesh lo medochenami, lav Korea. Because opening the letter, that's gufa tikkun. So it won't be Korea. Miu, yesh kan shvusot tikkun mona. Ve'ulai. That's the punchline. Ulai yesh kan Korea gam leperush Rashi. Given she'ein kan makah v'patish, she'ein kan binyan kli. So the Chazon Ish says, I'm willing to agree with the Mishnah Berurah, but on a condition. The reason we don't define this as Korea is because, once again, is it more similar to Korea, more similar to makah v'patish? Kriyas binyan, kriyas tikkun is not entirely Korea Shal Mishnah, and therefore we prefer to be miyaches this act to makah v'patish. If it wouldn't be makah v'patish, it would be Korea. And that goes back to the fundamental idea that I wrote in a few different sources. And because sometimes a certain act could be related to more than one malacha. But if there's only one act and one result, you can only be chayav one chatas. And we need to decide lama dumya tfei. Now we move over to a different sugya. Shulchan Aruch HaRav, Shin Mem Yud Zayin, has a gewaldige chiddush, and he says there is no chiyuv korea by paper, by plastic, only by a beged which is made out of threads, because korea is the opposite of toifer, just like soiser is the opposite of boina. Moichik is the opposite of koisev. Korea is the opposite of toifer. And a toifer brings together different parts. Korea takes them apart. But if we're dealing with paper or plastic or anything that is not made of, it's not fabric, that is made of threads, and you don't see different parts, different pieces. When you look at any garment or most garments, you see they're made of thread. So Toifer is the opposite of Korea, is taking about tefillah. And therefore, if we're dealing with leather, hide, paper, plastics, gewaldige chiddush. Shulchan Aruch HaRav says, there is no chiyuv of Korea. Shin Mem, Sif Yud Zayin, Shulchan Aruch HaRav. And this is a gewaldige nafkamina lahalacha, because when we're dealing about opening letters, tearing open envelopes, bags, and we tear open so many bags to take out food, to take out candies. Mishum Korea ein Israel Korea v'mafred kufim rabim sheneschabru kigon Korea beged ha'orod mechutim harbe. אבל הנייר שהוא גוף אחד, אין בפסיקוסי וחיתוכו משום קוריאה. ומטעם זה מותר לקרוא אור שעל פי החוביס של יין, כמבוא בסימן שין י"ד, מפני שהאור הוא גוף אחד, ולא שייך בו איסר קריאה, אלו איסר חיתוך. So when I logged in, I just heard that Shlomo is speaking about the difference between Machatach and Korea. But I didn't hear the beginning of the sentence. Maybe you spoke about this Shulchan Aruch HaRav. Shulchan Aruch HaRav says, Korea is the opposite of Taifa. It is only when you tear apart something that is put together in Magufim Rabim, but or, hide, leather, paper, plastics, there is no Korea. Nishma Sodom, a contemporary of the Shulchan Aruch HaRav, Nishma Sodom, Shabbos, Chovtes Beis, has a Habim in it. But he rejects it because of the Yerushalmi Nun Beis Amud Aleph. The Yerushalmi deals with the question, Ma Bein Korea LeMachatach. These two malachas seem to be similar. What is the difference between cutting and tearing? The Yerushalmi is not willing to say cutting is with a tool and tearing is with your hands. No. Korea Chayiv, even though he uses a tool. And Machatach is Chayiv, even if he doesn't use a tool. So what is the difference? The Yerushalmi, Nun Beis Amud Aleph, brings a stira between brises. One brise says, yes, Kriya Ba'or, Bechituch, Beniyar. The other source says the opposite. Kriya Beniyar, Chituch Ba'oyer. Bebeged, not Niyar. Beged and Oyer. And the Yerushalmi says there's a difference. Is it soft or is it hard material? Thick leather would not be Korea. It would be Machatach. A relatively thin garment would be Korea. So the Yerushalmi says it could go the other way around. Levodim. The Rambam in Hilchos Tumas Kelim defines leved, a thick beged, like our hats. Our hats are levied. Our shirts and pants and suits are a beged. Levodim, Yerushalmi, it depends. Is it thin or thick? And most Achroinim reject the Shulchan Aruch HaRav based on this Yerushalmi. Nishmasodim, Bialochen, Simen Shin Mem, Chazanish, Nun Aleph Yud Gimel, not the Chazanish we saw a few minutes ago, but a different one. And they say it depends, is it thick or thin? Korea is by the average beged. Mechatech is like a thick hide. Or levodim. Levodim is like our hats that are not as soft. They don't bend as easily as some other garments. The Minchas Chinuch in Musach HaShabbos, Saf Malachas Korea. I don't remember whether he brings the Yerushalmi. I think he does. But he clearly says, Shoiver Kalim. Would that be Machatach? Definitely not, because Kalim are entirely hard, more than hide. Hide is flexible. But if you have a wooden kli or a metal kli or a glass kli, that definitely wouldn't be Korea. That would be soisa. So most other Achroinim differentiate between Korea and Machatach, the nature of the object you are performing the malacha in. Shulchan Aruch HaRav says the difference is Machatach is by or, because or is one piece. Korea is only by garments, because Korea must be the opposite of Taifa, and that is Korea al menas litfor. So most Achronim reject Shulchan Aruch HaRav, but I think the Shulchan Aruch HaRav argues Ein halacha kedivrei haYerushalmi. Because we do not find it in Bavli. And this is a fundamental question in Darkei HaPsika. We find the Yerushalmi. We do not find a contradiction in the Bavli, but it's not found in the Bavli. Do we always paskin in accordance to the Yerushalmi? We're not seeing the Yerushalmi on the screen, but if we could have it, I think it would be helpful, because in the Yerushalmi there is an other pshat and an other difference between Korea and Mechatach. Okay. So I think this is the same Yerushalmi as I use, if I'm not mistaken. Is it Nun Beis Amud Aleph, or am I mistaken?
Yes, this is the Vilna edition.
Okay, so Vilna, I think it's Nun Beis Amud Aleph. That's the one I usually use. It'll take another moment. So here we are. So close to the top of the page. Kriya bebegodim, chituch ba'oris. The Yerushalmi, 7 lines from the top, says clear, but it is clear that that lamed is a mistake, which is extremely common in Yerushalmi. If you have a look both at the Pnei Moshe and the Korban O'Eda, both sides of the page, they both say kriya. Kriya bebegodim, chituch ba'oris. Kriya bebegodim be'emtza, chituch ba'oris min hatzad. Wow, that's a chiddush. So the Yerushalmi says the difference is it in the middle? That would be kriya. If it's min hatzad, that would be mechatach. I didn't plan to discuss this week. I don't know what we're going to do next week. But Baruch Hashem, I will be home next week. I was scheduled to fly out to Europe tomorrow morning. But Baruch Hashem, I'm well. But my hosts came down with COVID. So the kenes was called off. So Baruch Hashem, I'm going to be home Bezrat Hashem next week. So we'll get out of here. So the Yerushalmi says, Kriya begodim be'emtza, why would there be different whether the middle and the side? Then the Yerushalmi explains, the ones that are rak, soft. Which is a levet. And levet is a thick garment. So the Yerushalmi says there is kriya ba'oris. If the or is soft, Yesh kriya, lo kedivrei Shulchan Aruch HaRav. Shulchan Aruch HaRav is one of the greatest poskim, ledoiroi v'ledoiros. So I think we could be mitzad of the Shulchan Aruch HaRav, in cases of a suffolk or a sveik or a sveik that are bonon. But I agree with the Chazon Ish, the Mishnah Berurah. Absolutely, the Nishma Sodom had a have him in it. But he retracted based on the Yerushalmi, which brings us to the question, is it mutter to tear open bags, to take out food? Pri Chodosh, Yoredeya Kuf Yud Ches. Well, it's not Hilchos Shabbos, it's Yoredeya. How does it come into Yoredeya? Okay, because we're dealing with a choisem b'toch choisem. Could you tear open a choisem? Pri Chodesh says, when you cover a lock with a garment or with anything that covers that lock, that's a choisem b'toch choisem. You could tear it open on Shabbos. You can tear it open on Shabbos because that's korea. And it's a metakin, it's not a mechanical. Because the reason you're tearing open the seal is because you want to open the box and you want to take your stuff out. That is a metakin. Chashash is a diuraisa. Niyar she'al gabe haman'ul. Shuvas chacham tzvi chelek alaf lametes. says it's mutar lechatchila. Very uncommon in machlokes achronim. According to one, it's a chiyuv chatas, and according to the other, it's mutar lechatchila. The Chaim Tzvi says, I met the Pri Chodesh, I talked to him about it, I told him it's wrong, v'shosakli. How do we know why a Godel doesn't respond? Not always do we say, Shtike kohidoya dami. Shtike kohidoya is a din in Mumanis, it's a din in Beis Din. So on the sugi of Kansa bar Kansa, mideshat karabon shmam and anichalu. Sometimes I think mideshat karabon shmam and anichalu. Cham Tzvi disagrees and he says, I told the Pri Chodesh he's wrong, and he didn't respond. I don't know why he didn't respond. The son of the Cham Tzvi, Shilas Yavitz, Sinakuf Men, agrees with his father. He always does. Rabbi Yankov Enben was a big chassid of his father, and I don't even recall once that he calls his father and he doesn't agree, and that calls him quite often. But neither the Chacham Tzvi nor Rabbi Yankov Enben don't explain why do they think that Pri Chodesh is wrong. Sharat Shuv Shin Zayin, Sivkot Yudalad brings the Chacham Tzvi and the Pri Chodesh. Nishmas Odom, Chaf Tes Beis. Same seif that I quoted before regarding the Shulchan Aruch HaRav. Nishmas Odom. So if we want to have a look at the Chacham Tzvi, it is Simen Lamed Tes. This is an old print. We have some beautiful ones. So the Nishmas Odom says, the Pri Chodesh bases his ruling on the Rambam Koreh B'Chamasai, Koreh Al Meisai. So even though it's not Al Manas Litfor, but it's a Tikkun, and that is why he's Chayev. The Nishmas Odom says, and this is somewhat against the svara of the Bialocha, but not entirely. So the Nishmas Odom says, Koreh Al Meisai, Koreh B'Chamasai. Guf HaKriya is the Tikkun. I just want to go and take out a Chacham Tzvi because I don't see it on the screen. I see it, but it doesn't seem to be Lametes. One moment. Just one moment. Okay. Okay, so this is amazing. This is amazing. This is it. My memory is right. Towards the end of this tshuva, Ro'isi b'sefer nitpas mechodosh. Ro'isi b'sefer nitpas mechodosh. So strange. This is so, today you'll never find anything like this. Here we are. Ro'isi sefer nitpas mechodosh nikra pri chodosh. And scroll down, next page. He starts tearing him apart. What he wrote here, what he wrote there. Let's go down. Here we are. Okay. Second column. Gam masha osar. You see it, second column?
We have a new print here. Kavai Rav, we came up with a new print.
גם מה שעושה לקרויה נייד החוסם בשבס, אפילו על ידי גוי, והערך בזה, הכל הוא תוס גמור, שור עלי מורי, שעושה לסמותה והיטה לסעוסו, כאשר הכחתי ברייס גוס ומוקומחה, הלוי בספרוסי, וכבר הכחתי ועל פונו בהיוסי פה ימונו, ושעושה כלי. So, it doesn't have a shaykhus with a shayla. But he writes, hey, I got a new sefer. It's called the Pri Chodesh. And just starts tearing it apart. What he wrote here, what he wrote there. So it's no wonder why he doesn't argue in Svara, because it's not really relevant. It's not the question he's dealing with. He just... So, what's the shayla? The Nishma Sodom says, he's nanim a gufa kriya. The fact that he's destroying a beggar, that is what calms him down. But if you destroy a seal, even though you have a good reason to do so, you want to take the food out, that is a mekalkel, it's not a metaken. I want to go back to what we discussed last week. Even breaking a kli to take out food, it's like mishaber egoism b'shkedim. So when we're dealing with bags to take out food, that would be the heter of choitles shel tmorim. A sealed bag would be no different than a sealed can. So the argument with Cham Tzvi and Pri Chodesh is when you're tearing the seal is not protecting the food. There is a lock protecting the food. And you're tearing the seal just to get to the lock, and therefore there would be no heter of koitlis shel tmorim, and therefore the question would be, is it a metaken or a mekalkel? And that is a machlokes between the Pri Chodesh and the Chayulim. Tamsa said the bottom line is daiti. I agree with most of the Achronim that say you could tear open bags to take foodstuffs out of those bags for two different reasons. Mishma Sodom, Chacham Tzvi, Shilas Yankov, Riavet Zaras of Korea. But even Korea would be an Issa Rabbonon. And a Mekalkel is also Rabbonon. But a Mekalkel is also Korea only if there is a possibility of Almanas Litfor. When there cannot be Almanas Litfor and it's a Mekalkel, that would be mutar even lechatchila. So you could tear open bags to take food out of those bags, just like that is the din of choitles shel tmorim. According to the Pri Chodesh, it is a metaken. Some achronim are choshish to the Pri Chodesh. I think halacha, kechacham tzvi, shilas yavetz, nishmas odam, avnei nezer, orachayim reish tes, and many other achronim. The Rambam, shoy verodem chovietz, almanas, lahoitzi mimeno groi gerois. So today we discussed Maleches Korea. I hope it was an interesting shir. To me, it's always interesting. And b'siyata d'shmaya, we'll see each other next week. Thank you.
Okay, yes, HaRav. Okay, well, I heard about the change.